Thanks, Jimmy. It's a pleasure to be here. Great to see so many of you here out somewhere, wherever we are. Wow, we've come a long way, and it's really exciting for me to be here as kind of the lead-off speaker to set the science, set the tone, to just dispel any kind of old baggage that you might have about eating this way as being a bad thing to do or unhealthy. So this is a variation. Well, if you don't know who I am, I'm an internist. I'm internal medicine trained. I was trained in giving pills for every disease. One pill or two or three for diabetes, two for high blood pressure, one for cholesterol, one for GERD or heartburn, all of that. And now I take away those medicines, which is fabulous. And I just do low carb in my practice. So yeah, amen. I wouldn't be here except for the educational, very giving and care instruction by the Atkins people, Atkins team, like Jackie Eberstein, who's here. We'll hear from her later in the cruise. Jeff Volek, who's done much of the basic science as the foundation for our understanding of low-carb diets. Mary Vernon, who helped me become a medical weight loss doctor. I can go on and on and on. It's really a great lineup of people. One of my goals is to learn about the popularization of the science and to help translate the science into a way that you can understand. So I'm going to give the slide set today that I gave to physicians over this last year in 4 different medical settings. They're educational settings. The same slides, but I'm going to change the talk a little bit. So it's not going to be medical ease. I don't want to put people to sleep today, Jimmy. So please hold your questions till the end. And then actually on Saturday, I love it, we have hours to have questions for all of the speakers. And so please make notes. Actually, some of the questions you have for me may be answered in the other lectures that we hear. So this is really exciting for me. I hope you learn a lot, and please ask me on board between classes if you have any questions. And I love to hear everyone's stories about how their journey has been with the low-carb lifestyle. So, down to business. The Debunking Myths About Low-Carb Lifestyles was the title of the talk that I gave this last year. Here are the assumptions about low-carbohydrate, high-fat diets that I've run in through the years in the medical community and in the dietitians community. Humans must eat 120 grams of carbohydrates daily. Low-carb diets cannot lead to weight loss because they don't explicitly restrict calories. How could this happen? Low-carb diets are high-protein diets, and we know high-protein diets are very harmful. And we heard at the roast, they explode the kidneys, right? LCKDs, or low-carbohydrate ketogenic diets, the acronym for that, cause harmful ketosis. Low-carb diets are hard to maintain. And then LCKDs, low-carb diets, increase cardiometabolic risk. So I'm going to tackle each one of these. Humans must eat 120 grams of carbohydrates. Turns out, while Alfred Harper lived in the community that I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and his daughter went to my high school, and I tracked him down years later. He's the world's expert on essential nutrients. This is convenient. My mother tracked him down in Seattle. I went out to visit him. I was out there for a conference. Here are the human essential nutrients as written by Alfred Harper in the latest version. He has retired since, and no one really has picked up the essential nutrient chapter that I'm aware of. You will not find a carbohydrate on this essential nutrient list. It's well known that carbohydrates are not essential nutrients. What that means is you don't have to eat them. An essential nutrient means you have to eat them. Your body cannot make them. So your body can make carbohydrates. All right? That's the first myth that needs to be dispelled. The daily carbohydrate requirements, as written by the Institute of Medicine, which is our revered group that's unbiased. It's not the USDA, it's not the NIH, it's these scientists who get together and put together a document. The first bullet here from the document says, the lower limit of dietary carbohydrate compatible with life apparently is 0. Well, of course there has to be some hedge, right? No, it's 0. provided that adequate amounts of protein and fat are consumed. I'm not sure what that means, but so it's interesting. Then the next bullet, the minimal amount of exogenous, meaning from outside the body, and endogenous, inside the body, carb or carbohydrate, is dependent upon the brain. So 100 to 140 grams of glucose per day is required for the brain function, all right? So, however, if you take carbohydrates out of the diet and you become a fat-burning machine, ketones substitute for those glucose molecules, or if I turn everything upside down, the brain really wants ketones, and when you're eating carbohydrates, glucose substitutes for ketones in the brain. Right? Yeah, okay, there's someone got that. So after keto adaptation, after you don't eat carbs for a while, probably 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 80% of the CNS, central nervous system energy, can be derived from ketones, leaving about 20 to 28 grams of glucose per day required by the brain. If you look at it another way, how much can the liver make? The endogenous glucose production can be up to 200 to 270 grams of glucose per day from the liver. And that doesn't even account for the kidney making glucose as well. So you'll see documents, world-class documents, people getting together, writing, because the brain needs 120 grams of glucose, oh wait, okay, that's when you're eating carbs. You have to eat 120 grams of glucose. Oh wait, the body can make 200 grams of glucose. But because the brain needs 120 grams of glucose, you need to eat 120 grams of glucose. It's illogical, okay? Or maybe it's too close to logic. So the document, best I can tell, was not written by biochemists, by physiologists. It was written by epidemiologists, or maybe people who were asked to write it in that manner. I don't know. But it's not the full story. And I think that's what we're going to learn as a recurring theme, is that we haven't been telling the full story. So basically, energy processing is like this. If you took a biochemistry class, you would see food coming in the body. You have lipids or fats. You have carbohydrates in the middle and proteins on the right. And our body basically uses proteins to replenish the protein in your body. That's what muscles are made of. Most of our body's made of protein. So I kind of discount protein as a major fuel source. So we can use lipids or fats and carbohydrates as fuel. And then we break down these things. And down at the bottom, the molecule of energy in our body is called acetyl-CoA. So it's kind of like the gas in the gas can, or it's a molecule that we try to get to fuel the body. And so without carbohydrates in the diet, the fuel system to make energy looks like this. So let me go back. With carbohydrates in the diet, without carbohydrates in the diet, with carbohydrates in the diet, without. Now, what's funny is I don't get laughter from medical organizations. I get looks of derision and skepticism. And, it takes, like Tom Naughton was saying this morning, I'm alive. I haven't eaten carbohydrates in umpteen months, years, decades, and then, oh, well, gosh. Anyway, so your personal experience can be valuable to train people who are scientists or medical doctors or anyway. So, as good, when we got involved in the research, this is now back in the late 90s, we looked at the literature, and the literature was full of papers smattered here and there, taking the carbohydrates down to less than 20 grams a day. So these organizations, or the people proclaiming this wisdom or synthesis of the literature, just wasn't seeing all the data or ignoring the data. So these studies were out there. They weren't really put together very well, but they were there. So this was one of our first looks at the literature review back in the 1990s. There was a signal that, yeah, this did lead to weight loss, but this LDL cholesterol went up. In fact, a very important article by John LaRosa on this one, the top row there, 1980, was the most influential paper to put the kind of the final nail in the coffin of the low-carb movement at the time, because while everyone lost weight, and on the far right here, four columns from the far right, the weight went from 203 to 180 pounds. So there was great weight loss in this study, but the LDL cholesterol went up about, 24 points. So therefore it was bad and you shouldn't do it ever. So 24 patients, best I can tell by reading the paper is that they rustled together people at the NIH to do the study to show that it was bad, basically. And now we know that LDL does not mean what they thought that it meant then. And so we'll talk about that. That's the cardiometabolic risk part. But so one paper, an influential person, and everyone knows that it's bad because, right, fat's bad. So that was enough to just kind of squelch the research for 22 years. Kind of a sad story, huh? So you don't have to have 120 grams of carbohydrate per day in the diet. Low carb diet, next bullet. Low carb diets cannot lead to weight loss because they don't explicitly restrict calories. Now this causes lots of confusion. There were even books saying that calories don't count and all this, and oh, calories not a calorie. You know, just let's put that to rest. You know, I think the basis of all of this is that dietitians are taught you have to talk about calories. You have to restrict calories. You have, in fact, dietitians are taught to calculate out your calorie level based on your age, your gender, how much you weigh. If you didn't talk about calories, dietitians wouldn't have a job, really. No, you're not supposed to laugh at that. I get stern looks from dietitians because it makes them very nervous. So you don't have to talk about calories. Calories matter in terms of weight loss. That's not what we're talking about. Okay? Have you read Gary Taubes' analogy? Is that you look at a restaurant in New York City, why is that restaurant busy? And you ask your friend, and your friend says, more people went in the restaurant. Why is the restaurant full? More people went in the restaurant than came out. And you ask your friend, what? Why is the restaurant so full? Well, more people went in than came out. You know, you're going to hit them, right? This is obvious, right? So it's calories matter in terms of the science of weight loss and energy balance, but it's not helpful in terms of low-carb diets or understanding the teaching of low-carb diets. So people eat fewer calories, and let me demonstrate that. So in our first paper, remember the La Rosa paper was 1980. Our first paper came out in 2002. Had twice as many people as the La Rosa paper. We had the actual instruction from people who had used low-carb diets for 30 years. That's the other thing you'll see in the research. The researchers went out and they just kind of rustled up an intervention and read a book, and they never talked to people who had actually done it. So we spent 2 days in the Atkins Center learning from Jackie Eberstein and Colette Heimowitz and Valerie Berkowitz, who's here today. And we tried to implement what a doctor had figured, and a nurse and dietitians had figured out over a 30-year career. So we put 51 people on the diet. There was great weight loss. And the signal, or what this component is, we didn't say anything about calorie restriction. We didn't tell them to reduce calories, but they ate less and they lost weight. Okay, now I may be preaching to all of you who know this, but you need to know that the science is there to say it as well. Okay, an uncontrolled study, 50 people over 6 months, isn't good enough. So we went back and said, I asked Dr. Atkins to fund that first paper because there was no one else really who was interested. Okay, it may have been convenient, low-hanging fruit kind of thing, but looking back, no one had ever asked Dr. Atkins to do a study, ever, which is kind of interesting. Maybe Jackie, and pick Jackie's brain about that, but Jackie Eberstein. So we went back and said, you need to do a randomized trial. So I'm at Duke University, I'm trained in clinical research. We really need a randomized trial because actually some of the people in that first study had done Atkins before. So imagine everyone had done Atkins in that first paper. You knew that it was going to work, right? So that's how you kind of select the people to make sure your study works. You know, there are ways to do that. So what we did is we went back and did not give people a choice of what group they were going to be in. That's called randomization or a randomized control trial. So what we did was use the low-fat, low-calorie diet, calorie restricted on the top right, like a dietitian would use, and then a low-carbohydrate diet with no mention of calories on the bottom right. They all had group meetings. They all were told to exercise, and in North Carolina, most did not exercise. It's just not, it's too hot, that's why. So great weight loss, both kinds of methods worked, although the low-carb method worked better. and that's kind of my recurring theme. There are lots of good ways to go about this, but low carb seems to work better for most of the things we've measured. So you don't have to talk about calories to get people to lose weight. You just restrict carbohydrates, appetite goes down, people eat fewer calories, they can lose weight. Third myth, low carb diets are high protein diets. Right? I mean, this is like, how many people have heard that, you know? Yeah. Right. Well, so we don't really talk about the protein much. We don't really talk about the fat much. We talk about restricting carbohydrates. And so we want to go to about 50 grams or 20 grams of total carbs optimally. That's the kind of what I call the old Atkins. If you went to the Atkins Center back in the 1990s, early 2000s, this is what you would have been taught. And when you get to that level, the carbohydrates are not around enough for you to have them as a sufficient fuel source. So you become a fat burner. And as a result, you have ketones in the urine, and we call that ketonuria, and that's called a ketogenic diet. And we just talk about carbohydrate restriction. We don't really talk about the protein and the fat much. And as long as you're eating real foods, it's really pretty interesting. It will come out individualized. So I wanted to just let you know that that first induction level in the Atkins language, or phase 1 in other language, is 20 grams of carbs. I use total carbs. The new Atkins uses net carbs. I use total carbs in my clinic if you've come to me, and then net carbs for near your maintenance or at maintenance. Ongoing weight loss, phase 3, pre-maintenance, phase 4, lifetime maintenance. This is all documented in the new Atkins book. My co-authors are Steve Phinney. Steve Phinney is our teacher for nutrition and metabolism. Brilliant guy. And Jeff Volek, who's here. We'll hear from Jeff later and hear the latest science. So when you teach a low-carb ketogenic diet, this is what you do originally. You can have eggs and bacon, or you could have sugar-free yogurt with little berry slices at the bottom. You could have chicken Caesar salad, or you could have a fast food burger without the bun. The Wendy's Baconator with a bun satisfies many of my patients early on. Remember, this is North Carolina we're talking about, okay? There are regional variations, and if I said no fast food, I would reduce the people who would be able to do this. Probably 80% of my patients eat fast food every day. Olives or cheese sticks or you could have pepperoni slices or chicharrones. Funny, a friend of mine who's a little more cheeky than I put the nutrition facts of pork rinds, chicharrones. I put that on there because for those who don't know what it is, it doesn't bother them. But if I put pork rinds on there, dietitians go ballistic. So again, it's the bacon. Are you crazy? I want to see, eat pork rinds with gusto, Pork rinds, you put the nutrition facts of pork rinds and potato chips side by side. A friend of mine did this, a colleague. And the nutrition facts, everyone agreed the one on the left was more nutritious and better, and the one on the right was not. Well, the one on the left was the pork rinds, and the one on the right was the potato chips. But then he unveiled what they were, and they all said, ew, we wouldn't recommend those. Now, I may have to ask some of well, forget it. There are regional differences. Steak with blue cheese and broccoli, or you could have salmon with cream cheese or cream sauce. There are lots of ways to do a low carbohydrate diet, and it's not something that has to be untasty. Or one of my colleagues, Diane Stadler at the University of Oregon, has a data set of low carb versus low fat. She hasn't published it yet, but she came up with this term, food disinterest. And I said, well, what do you mean, Diane? She said, well, people didn't seem to care much about food, so we called it food disinterest. And it's pretty high on the disinterest scale when you do Atkins, Eric. I said, well, what do you mean? She says, well, people don't really want to eat. And I'm like, well, is that bad? I give pills to people to suppress their appetite so they lose weight. So she's not a weight loss person. It's a PhD scientist. She's trying to figure out how to explain the total appetite suppression that some people get when they don't eat carbohydrates. I say, well, carbs make you hungry. Don't eat carbs. You're not hungry. How many of you believe that carbs make you hungry? And if you don't eat carbs, can I get a photo of this, please? Well, it's just overwhelmingly obvious, and yet if there's no study about it, it can't be true. So we hand out a list of foods that people choose the foods they like. I don't tell anyone to eat anything. one woman came back and said, "Oh, I can't eat all this bacon." And I said, "Well, when did I ever say you had to eat bacon?" "Oh, okay." You know, there's a popular belief of what it is, and then there's the reality of how you can do it. And a lot of people need that kind of coaching. It's great to see new dietitians and practitioners popping up with that knowledge and assistance, because a lot of people need that help. So is it a high-protein diet? When you look at this is the first sort of estimate of what people were eating on an ad lib, low-carb, ketogenic diet, Atkins kind of diet. We said nothing about calories in the teaching, and yet they reduced their calories to 1,400 a day. Their estimate was about 2,000, 2,200 at baseline. So they reduced their calories 500 to 700 deficit, we call it, per day, without talking about calories. And the protein intake was about the same as they were eating before. One patient said to me, "Well, that's kind of obvious. I just eat the meat and the veggie, and I don't eat the starch like before." So when you look at the amount of food that people are eating, it's just without the starch. So the best paper, if I said, here's what you read, and this is what I make my medical students at Duke read, is the paper by Gunther Boden, where they had people on a metabolic ward, meaning they locked them up. And so they knew exactly what people were eating. I always have that nagging question in the back of my mind. Did people really tell me everything they're eating on those estimates of what they're eating? Doesn't seem to bother my colleagues at Harvard who do the nutritional epidemiology studies, or as we're going to hear about the T. Colin Campbell studies. You know, it doesn't seem to bother them that they're just asking people what they're eating, and oh, it must be true, la 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 la. So Gunther Boden did this great paper, 2005. I haven't seen anyone do another one. There's a saying in science that the hallmark of science is replication. But nobody's able to get money to replicate these studies. That's a sad state currently. The protein intake was about the same as before, the fat intake about the same as before, and the carbohydrate intake went way down on an ad lib, low carbohydrate, very low carbohydrate, ketogenic diet. So some people can overeat or get lots of protein more than before if they're using protein shakes and things that aren't natural foods. But I've not really seen anyone go over the 200 grams a day, which is what the consensus says is, you don't want to do that for very long. So I think what's happened here is that people misunderstand the percent protein of calories for the absolute amount of protein. So the percent protein in the diet has gone up, but the absolute amount of protein has not. And it's the absolute amount of protein that matters metabolically, not the percent of protein in the diet. Next bullet, next myth. Low-carb ketogenic diets cause harmful ketosis. Can you all say that? Harmful ketosis. Now, healthy ketosis. Healthy ketosis. Or Steve Finney would say nutritional ketosis. Nutritional ketosis. So you got to have that roll off your tongue like you've said it a million times. You're selling this idea that low-carb, wrong audience. No, I guess we all are to a certain degree. But do low-carb ketogenics cause harmful ketosis? Well, the first thing you need to know is what a ketone is and what it does. Ketone bodies are molecules that provide energy. That's all they are. Ketones can be used by all the cells except cells that don't have the fuel utilization system to burn fat. And that's in the mitochondria of the cell. So red blood cells cannot burn ketones, but fortunately red blood cells are in the blood. And that's where the glucose is. Curious connection there. So the glucose is where it needs to be. It's in the blood, because these blood cells need the glucose. It doesn't need to be in the cells, the other cells, but it's in the blood. That's a good place. Now, couple that with the only thing, the most convenient thing we can measure in medicine is the blood. So this is why we get confused about how important glucose is, because we're measuring where the glucose is, where it needs to be to give the red blood cells the energy they need. Cornea, lens, retina, renal medulla, these all need glucose as well. Fortunately, the kidney can make its own glucose. It's as if the body has a way to maintain and ensure that a very sensitive area, the renal medulla, this is the part of the kidney near the ending of the urine where it comes out, that needs glucose, and the kidney can make its own glucose. That's pretty nice. Ketone levels increase when dieting, but not much. So in fact, overnight, people have ketones even if they're eating a mixed diet, if they haven't eaten much in the evening, which reminds me of that, remember that Palmolive commercial where Madge is getting her fingers soaked and they talk about oh, it's Palmolive and you're soaking in it. Oh, so you can say, well, ketones, well, you have them too. Oh no, trying to make so I've been heavily influenced by Tom Naughton's work, Fathead. Can we just say hooray for Fathead? And don't confuse that with the Fathead posters online. Fathead the movie is where you get to it. But using humor has been very helpful for me in educating patients when they come in so seriously and without much knowledge. And then you show them things that just are like, oh, wow, I never thought of that. And then you can laugh about it. For most people it works, not everyone. But so on a low-carb ketogenic diet, now Jeff Volek has done a lot of this work, and Will Yancey has done a lot of this work. Will Yancey is a colleague of mine at Duke and at the Durham VA Medical Center. And what we found is that the ketone levels go up a little bit in the blood, but not much. But then the arterial pH, whether there's acidosis or harmful acidosis, it just doesn't happen. Now, it may happen rarely. So the other weird thing in medicine is that if something happens once, you can write a case report about it and get it in a major journal. And then doctors who know very little about the underlying physiology will see the one case report, 1 in 10 million or how many million have done it. And then they say, oh, well, look, it causes ketosis and harmful acidosis. And even in that case study that's out there, there's no guarantee or understanding of what they were really doing. They say, I did Atkins. Well, what does that mean? So you have to, where the information comes from is, it's unfortunate that a case study can erase all the science, kind of like a press release can erase all of the knowledge that you have. And so you just have to be aware of that and say that, well, if that happens, it's pretty rare. So there's not harmful ketosis. In fact, last year, the Metabolism Society, there's a Nutrition and Metabolism Society that talks about the science of low carb and other issues, but basically it's to get a venue for low carb science. It was all about ketone bodies. And you can get access to these lectures from a DVD that's available at the American Society of Bariatric Physicians. They make lecture videos of all of the conferences that are done. It's a great conference. It shows not only are ketones not harmful, they're probably healthful and healthy, and maybe even prevent things like cancer, like Alzheimer's, like epilepsy. So, when we're really starting to shine the scientific light on low-carb diets and ketones, what we're seeing is good news. Okay, that was really an exciting conference. I think it's going to be perhaps like the Ancestral Health Conference. This is like the Woodstock of ketones. I know that sounds pretty weird, but ketone power. We need a T-shirt like that, right? The next myth, low-carb diets are hard to maintain. How many of you think low-carb diets are hard to maintain? Hey, wait.
Compared to what?
Yeah, compared to what? It's a great question. How many of you think low-carb diets are easy to maintain? All right, so at least we know there are a couple hundred in the world who say that. So that's the response I get is, well, okay, well, at least you can do it, or maybe something magical about you and your patients. The first study I did, David Ludwig, who's a colleague of mine at Harvard, came up to me and said, well, Eric, that diet worked because you're so charismatic. I said, what? Yeah, it was. I was really pretty shocked. Well, flattered, but shocked. But so David just doesn't have the clinical touch or experience to know that this is something that he should continue to study, unfortunately. But he's pretty influential, and at least is open-minded and data-driven. And that's really all data-driven, meaning you follow the data and have an open mind to hear the data. At least he is that way. So our low-carb diet's hard to maintain. Well, Richard Feynman and Mary Vernon and I did a survey of the low carbohydrate internet-based support group Active Low Carbers Forum. Now, a few years back, and there are 100, maybe 80, 90, 100,000 now. I forget what it is today, who at least log in and say they're doing low-carb diets and have done it for a long time. And we had survey respondents, 2,000 people sent in all the health issues that got better, and it was pretty impressive. And I see that kind of as a template for where to take the science. But if we ever got the money to do the science, it's great. Probably should survey these folks again to see. To focus. What I've really done is formalized the clinical experience of doctors. I didn't come up with the idea, but I've been able to package it and put it in a more formal way so that it's more believable, and that's kind of like what I'd like to do with a survey like this. So my colleague and friend from Sweden, Andreas Enfeldt, helped me when I was there in Stockholm now a year and a half ago, gave a talk at an International Diabetes Association, and here was the hits on the website, the LCHF, and he tells me he's going to show even more, and it's even more popular. And I do hold Andreas partially responsible for the butter shortage in Norway. Hooray! It's too bad that, well, I don't know all the details.
Blame is credit.
Yeah, it's not blame, it's credit. Well, but people need butter, so it's kind of a mixed thing, they're not hard to maintain necessarily. And can you imagine back to when fitness, there weren't any gyms, there weren't any exercise machines, and if people said, well, no one's going to exercise, let's give up on it. Now, I mean, it's so important. How many people have home gyms and exercise and do it all the time? So we're kind of at that level of toddlerhood where, you tell the child, well, look, the child can't walk. Push him over. That's what I did to my third child, but not so fast. But so there has to be some support early on to help people maintain it, rather than the don't do that. I had a grocery store clerk who told me, you don't eat all those eggs, your cholesterol will go up. I said, don't worry, I'm a doctor, and she wasn't reassured. So I figured out why after that. But so low-carb ketogenic diets increase cardiometabolic risk. So this is kind of the final myth that needs to be dispelled. The second to last chapter in the New Atkins book is written specifically for this, and Jeff Volek wrote the chapter to explain the shift from LDL cholesterol, which is what our doctors, and now even the US model has been exported around the world, unfortunately. Just the LDL is all that matters, the low density lipoprotein, the bad guy, the lethal cholesterol, I've heard it said, that's not the only thing you look at. And so now we understand cardiometabolic risk, or what the underlying cause of heart disease and atherosclerosis and hardening of the arteries, all the same concept, really comes from the triglyceride and HDL part of that panel, so not just the LDL. And Jeff did a wonderful job of explaining that in the New Atkins book. My hope is that patients who really want to help their doctors through this educational process would hand out that book and just say, hey, look, can you look at the second to last chapter for me? Don't even read how to do it and all, which reminds me of Mary Vernon saying, doctors refer their patients, but they say, don't tell me what you're doing. I don't want to know that you're telling them to eat fat. Oh, because we all know that fat is bad. Well, the cholesterol panel that is done optimally should be fasting. What happens on a low-carb diet is that the triglycerides go down almost uniformly. I think I've seen one person whose triglycerides have not gone down, but that person still had a lot of weight to lose. So whether you're doing it in a weight loss phase or a regular weight maintenance phase matters. And then the HDL cholesterol, the good guy, the healthy cholesterol, goes up more than any other kind of intervention that we know of, better than any drug, better than exercise. And then this is the randomized trial. And remember, I show this to doctors who are like scrutinizing every little number on here. If I have an asterisk off, I'll hear about it at the end of the talk. So, but you don't have to know all that. When you look at the type of LDL, and this is how you can explain it, is that the low density lipoprotein or bad cholesterol actually changes in quality. So it goes from the small LDL, which we think is the bad guy, to the large LDL, or large, light, and fluffy LDL. And that satisfies many of the preventive cardiologists who are into that and kind of understand that. So I get many referrals from a cardiologist at Duke who understands cardiometabolic risk in terms of this. So a cardiologist sends me patients to help with their metabolic problems, okay? Many cardiologists actually, but yeah, hooray for that. Hallmark of science is replication. The Shishrati paper showed the same kind of qualitative change as the Westman et al. Paper. And now, but there's some people, organizations who say, well, there's no meta-analysis, so we don't know if it's true. Well, there are several meta-analyses now of randomized controlled trials of low-carb diets. This one was by Nordman in 2006. And I just show all the cardiometabolic risk factors here. And on the right side of that vertical line, the low-carb group, the recurring theme is that in yellow is that the triglycerides go down more than a low-fat, low-calorie diet, and the HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol, goes up more than in a low-fat, low-calorie diet. It's a recurring theme. We see it in just about every study. Now, there were a couple popular diet studies out there where investigators who never had done really a low-carb diet before kind of got books, handed them out, and kind of supported people a little bit. So what I hear filtered through this study is, well, Atkins is okay, but you only get 2 kilos of weight loss at a year. And I said, yeah, that's when you don't really teach people what to do and you don't really help them. You just got to know that the Danziger study and the Gardner studies are out there, but I think the results were pretty unimpressive. In our analysis of people coming through, all comers, meaning some people really don't want to lose weight, some do want to lose weight, some have diabetes and all these other medical problems, we get about 30 to 50 pounds of weight loss per year on average, and the range is from 20 to 100. When you're in a medical clinic supporting people, or you have a dietitian who's supporting people, understanding how to do it, you can get much better results. But those aren't published, so a lot of people won't believe you unless they're publications. Christopher Gardner, I have to hand it to him. He's the only researcher who did a first study ever on low carb and has tried to get funding again to follow the data. Most of these other scientists did it and then quit it. And I asked Gary Foster, why don't you keep studying? He said, I can't get money to study it. So it's difficult to sustain. So what's happening is people like Jeff Volek are training the youngsters like Cassandra Forsyth, a new generation of scientists who carry it forward and take it as part of their career. And that's how the science changes. So it's very difficult to get a panel of people who are already near their end of their career to fund research that's so outside of their comfort zone. And that just explains why we don't have all of the studies. Christopher Gardner, in unpublished data, he talks about this and has this on a YouTube video. Low-carb diets work whether you're insulin resistant or insulin sensitive, and low-fat diets really didn't work well if you're insulin resistant. And this kind of explains why historically low-fat, low-calorie diets have worked back in the 1990s when people didn't have insulin resistance. The low-fat diet works pretty well. But Dr. Atkins had a selection bias of people who had insulin resistance. So it was led toward the low-carb diet explicitly. Now, unfortunately, the U.S., we have more insulin-resistant people than insulin-sensitive people. So even Christopher Gardner says, who's a vegetarian guy, says, the low-carb diet has a role for insulin-resistant people. Now, I look at this and I say, so low-carb works whether you're insulin-resistant or not. Why not just use low-carb? Well, I mean, that's kind of my perspective, but go figure. Carb restriction treats metabolic syndrome, lots of papers out there. So what are the youngsters doing now? And these are the people we need to shepherd. Will Yancey did a study of low-fat and orlistat, so it's a drug and a diet, and it's kind of a traditional FDA approved model versus the low-carb ketogenic versus just the diet. And the drug and the diet did about the same as the diet. So the low-carb diet did as well as low-fat diet, low-fat, low-calorie, and orlistat, which is a fat blocker that's FDA approved. So low-carb diets can do very well. And what we're finding is that blood pressure goes down better in low-carb diets than in other kinds of diets. So let me wrap up. Carbohydrate is not an essential nutrient. Low-carb diets lead to weight loss because abnormal hunger and appetite goes away. Low-carb diets are adequate protein diets. Nutritional ketosis is a marker of burning fat. That's all. For many people, low-carb diets are easy to follow. Others may need instruction and support. And low-carb ketogenic diets reduce cardiometabolic risk by addressing the metabolic syndrome, or triglyceride and HDL and waist circumference and blood pressure. So I'd like to just wrap up with something that might be helpful for a video. Maybe Tom can use this. So here's how fat comes in the body. Fat gets taken up by the cells, and the liver is making large LDL. So fat does not lead to fat in your blood very long. It gets cleared pretty fast. And then that large LDL is not leading to atherosclerosis. I put a question mark on there because Galileo didn't get hanged because he said it was all a hypothesis. So this is all a hypothesis. All right. So here's what happens when you have carbohydrate in the diet and fat in the diet. I'd love to see this animated, So it's the carbohydrates that get turned into the triglyceride, and then they get put on the VLDL, which leads to the small LDL and the atherosclerosis. So it's not the fat in the diet. I came to the National Lipid Association conference last year, and I asked a very intelligent university employee her experience. And what should I say to the group? These are 500 lipidologists from around the country coming to an annual meeting. She's a 50-year-old white female with obesity, and she wanted to lose weight. And her experience was that her weight went from 178 pounds to 138 pounds after a carbohydrate-restricted diet. Her total cholesterol went from 245 to 209. Her triglycerides went to from 247 to 46. LDL went from 141 to 119. HDL 54 to 81. Glucose 92 to 88. Everything got better. She felt great. She felt so much better. This may be your experience. So she said, ask the doctors, why wasn't I given this option before? I was just given the option of the medications. And I think that's what we need to ask, and also figure out how to fix that so that people are offered this first. And I think we can actually do a lot to change the mindset of people around the country, and now with Sweden, hooray, in the world, and everyone can have a healthier life, perhaps. So thank you so much, and I look forward to a great conference.